to many of you. The meeting's being recorded. This is important for all of us. So welcome back to many of you, and welcome to those of you who have not been part of Cheese O'Clock in the past. We, in many good ways, we took about a 2-year break, but that's because we all emerged into the world again after that terrible time in our history. And but here we are enjoying cheese and wine, and not just any cheese and wine. And I don't want to forget to say that some of the proceeds from tonight are going to World Central Kitchen. And for anyone who is not familiar with that organization, you can find it at wck.org. It is a magnificent organization that is worth knowing about. So we are in for a really great night of cheese and wine pairing. I do say cheese and wine. I'm sure that Domaine Carneros calls it wine and cheese, but whatever the case, we are in for it. And tonight I am joined by my colleague, my cheese colleague extraordinaire, Janet Fletcher, cheese maker extraordinaire, Kuba Hemmerling, and winery CEO extraordinaire, Remy Cohen from Domaine Carneros. And of course, Kuba is with Point Reyes Cheese. Just one little thing about myself. I am the author of several books about cheese, and I am a speaker in the corporate world as well as at food and wine events around the country. And I'm really happy to be on this virtual call, as I said, after a long time away. And I guess with that, I will turn it over to Janet.
Thanks, Laura. I'm Janet Fletcher here with you from Napa Valley, and just really excited to be back. I think it's been a couple of years since we've had a Cheese O'Clock, and we hadn't really thought about bringing it back, but then we had this great opportunity to partner with Point Reyes, one of our favorite California creameries, and with Domaine Carneros, which makes such splendid sparkling wine in that beautiful space that you can see behind Remy, one of the most beautiful places you can visit in Napa Valley. So just couldn't turn down this opportunity to have a holiday edition of Cheese O'Clock and help you get your holidays off to a great start. So I just want to remind you that we'd love for you to take advantage of the chat and keep the conversation going among yourselves. I think there are some people from Point Reyes and Domaine Carneros on the chat. So if you have questions, about like, where can I find this cheese? They can probably answer that in the chat. But please put any other questions you have for Laura or me or our panelists in the Q&A, and we will have some time at the end to get to your questions. Also wanted to remind you that we would love it if you would take a picture of your cheese board or your cheese party and post on social media. Please use our hashtag Cheese O'Clock and tag Laura and me. I am Janet Fletcher NV for Napa Valley. And Laura is Cheese Lady with a Z. So please help us keep the conversation going about Cheese O'Clock on social media. And with that, I'm going to turn it back to Laura to introduce our first guest.
Okay. So as Janet intimated, we could not do this without Point Reyes cheese, and I could not live without Point Reyes cheeses. So there's that. But so Kuba is the man behind the magic at Point Reyes Cheese Company. He came to us by way of Poland, where he is from, and of course that's where they make lots of cheeses. Actually, they probably do. I just don't know what those are. But in any case, so Kuba, tell us just a little bit about yourself and then about the cheeses that we are tasting tonight.
Well, welcome everybody. Thank you, Laura, Janet, for having me here tonight. Those two gals are my favorite California cheese writers. So I was very privileged that you guys invited us to have this event tonight. Yeah, like Laura mentioned, I came from Poland. I've been with Point Reyes Farmstead since 2009. I studied food science in Poland at the Agricultural University of Poznań, where I graduated with engineering degree in food science. Came to States in 2005. And work with actually as a kind of an interesting side note with original Cowgirls cheesemaker, Von Smith. He was a cheesemaker from Netherlands, and he really kind of inspired me to get more interested in cheese making. And that's kind of how I fell in love with passion of making cheese, which is which is people say it's a combination of art and science. There is art to it, but there is also a lot of science, more science than art, I would say, just because you want to make sure that you perfect those cheeses. So yeah, and I've been with Point Reyes for 15 years. Started with Original Blue. I took over that recipe in 2009, do some slight modifications, and in 2010 we started introducing new cheeses, and right now we have a 5 core products, and one of the products, Toma, which has a additional 3 flavors, and today we will be trying Toma truffle, as well as traditional Dutch Gouda, which is aged for at least 12 months. We have a bloomy rind, soft ripened, wrapped in spruce bark, quinta, and we're gonna finish it up with bay blue.
And I think we have a video of what Point Reyes cheese looks like, or at least the dairy and cheese making operation. Well, you definitely get the prize for the most clever name of a robotic cheese turner, Tina Turner, if anybody missed that. It's very cute. Is that what they play? Do they play Tina Turner songs? Well,
we don't play much Tina Turner with her, but nevertheless, she is one of our most reliable employee who never missed a day at work. She works 24/7. She does need a little bit of TLC every once in a while, but she doesn't even need the light to work. So yeah, she's been great.
All right, Janet.
Well, I would like to, at this point, introduce our other guest, Remy Cohen from Domaine Carneros. Remy has a master's in viticulture, and I think she's probably one of the few people in the California winemaking who not only has a master's in viticulture, but has an MBA as well. So she is really, I'm sure Domaine Carneros was thrilled to get her. She's only the 2nd CEO in the company's history, and she's the 2nd female CEO. So this is a very, I think, a company that really values women in leadership. And I know they value sustainability, and that's an important thing that Remy will talk to us about. So Remy, thank you for joining us. I'm really looking forward to Bubbles.
Thank you, Janet. Yeah, I really appreciate it. You touched on a few of our tenets and values at Domaine Carneros, but a little bit of history. We were founded in 1987 by the Tattinger family, the legendary Champagne family behind Champagne Tattinger. And at the time, they hired Eileen Crane, one of the first women winemakers in California, to helm the operation, which is really amazing. I'm going to give a special shout out to one of the attendees tonight, which is Zach Miller. He is our current sparkling winemaker and also a huge fan of Janet and Laura and Cheese O'Clock. And he's watching with his family tonight. So if we have any really technical winemaking questions, Zach, our sparkling winemaker, is with us. We are what you call a grower producer. You mentioned that I have a master's in viticulture, so that's something that's really valuable to me, is that we farm our own land. So we have 6 different estates, all in the Carneros region. We farm about 400 acres of mostly Chardonnay and Pinot Noir, which are 2 of the grape varieties that go into making sparkling wine and making champagne and champagne. The Carneros is in the southern end of Napa and Sonoma counties. It's the only wine region that spans both counties. It's cooler climate, so it's great for those cooler climate varieties. And as Janet mentioned, we've been women-led since our inception, and we also focus on sustainability. So we are a solar-powered winery. We have solar energy, but also a microgrid, so we can work off of our own solar energy in the case of a power outage, or also use our own solar energy in the evenings or night through battery storage. We also collect all the rainfall on our property and use that for vineyard irrigation and recycle all the water that we use in the winemaking process. So some of our valuable things that we have, and tonight I have 2 special wines for you, not only our delicious 2019 Brut Sparkling, but our 2021 Estate Pinot Noir. And I might be biased, but sparkling wine and Pinot Noir, I believe, and others might concur, are 2 of the most versatile wines for food pairing. So I think it's going to be really exciting to go back and forth with Cuba and have us all play around with the different pairings where we can try both of the wines with all of the cheeses.
You want to cue up that video?
Oh yeah, let's do it.
When Claude Taittinger came to building Domaine Carneros, the Carneros had the perfect climate and the right terroir as well.
The breeze that comes all the way from the Pacific and comes through the Petaluma wind gap is really critical for cooling off the grapes at night. And this helps to preserve the acidity, which is a really critical component for both the sparkling and the still wines.
One of the hallmarks of a finely made bottle of traditional method sparkling wine is the fine bead of bubbles. This is a more labor-intensive way of making sparkling wine, but it is a quality stamp and one that we believe in.
One of the main principles we have focused on is the use of renewable energy. In 2003, we built one of the largest solar arrays of any winery in the world. And right now, we are expanding on our commitment to solar energy by building a microgrid. We use those guiding principles to lead everything we do moving forward. There is a lot of dynamic energy here at Domaine Carneros, all of which builds upon our foundation of creating memorable sparkling wine experiences.
Yeah, it is really a splendid spot. I recommend it to a lot of people when they say, where should I go tasting in Napa Valley? I said, well, you have to start at Domaine Carneros. It's just so beautiful to be sitting out on your terrace and drinking bubbles. But you brought more than bubbles today, but would you just walk us through the 2 wines that you brought, the sparkling wine and the Pinot Noir, so we can get familiar with them before we move to the cheese?
Yes, so I know some of you are tasting along with us. This is the first wine, is our 2019 Estate Brut. This is a blend of Chardonnay and Pinot Noir from our estate vineyards. We use, as the video showed, a process called the traditional method, Méthode Traditionnelle, which is that every fermentation, the second fermentation, occurs within the individual bottle, which is really special, and it's a hallmark of quality, and it creates the complexity, the yeastiness, and the toastiness that we're used to in fine sparkling wines from around the world. So this is a blend of Chardonnay and Pinot Noir. It goes through the secondary fermentation in the bottle, and then it ages for a minimum of 3 years, which is the rules in Champagne for vintage dated wine. It's not something that in the US we're required to do, but we do believe that it adds to complexity in the wine. And so I think as we're talking in the context of cheese pairing, there's a couple of things that make sparkling wine, and particularly this Estate Brut, so versatile for pairing with cheese. One was called out by our Pinot Noir winemaker, TJ, in the video, which is the acidity. So the retention of the acidity from being grown in the cool climate of Carneros really makes this wine very versatile in terms of cheese pairing. And the acidity really can cut the richness of a variety of cheeses. And then the second wine is our 2021 Pinot Noir. TJ likes to say that this wine is a mosaic of the Carneros region. We take different components of our wines from all 6 of our vineyards throughout the Napa and Carneros region to create this mosaic of the Carneros. And this wine similarly has the beautiful freshness and acidity that you have and you expect from the Carneros region, but very different than the citrus notes of the brut and the kind of creamy complexity from the extended aging. You've got a lot of beautiful berry fruit and a little bit of earth tones. So it will be really interesting, I think, as we go through the different cheese tasting to compare and contrast the pairings. But I have a feeling that we're going to have a lot of fans of pairing both of these wines with all of these cheeses.
Yeah, I mean, what I love about bubbles so much with cheese is that they really scrub your palate. I mean, cheese is fat. We have to acknowledge that. It just coats your tongue, and the bubbles and the high acidity really help to kind of clean up your tongue and get you ready for the next bite. So it's certainly my go-to wine for cheese. If I could only have one wine, it would be bubbles. But I know that Pinot is going to be a great match as well. Before we get into cheese, I just want to remind everybody about the Q&A. To please give us your questions. And I also want to remind you that this is being recorded. And it will very quickly go onto my website, video archive, and Laura's, and I think Point Reyes will post it as well. So if you have friends who want to listen to this later, you'll still be able to purchase the cheese collection from Point Reyes for a little while longer, the Cheese O'Clock collection. You'll still be able to purchase these 2 wines from Domaine Carneros as a set. So what a nice holiday gift to give these cheeses and wines, plus the donation to World Central Kitchen, which Point Reyes will make, and they can watch the video along with it and have Cheese O'Clock on their own. So with that, Laura, I'm going to turn it over to you to get us started with the cheese.
I have so much to say about the wine and cheese pairing, but I know everybody wants to get into the pairing itself. So let's do that. Our first cheese, Kuba, is your truffle Toma truffle, excuse me. And so I think for anybody that didn't know there was truffles in it, all they would have to do is lift it up, and the underside, especially, it's just captured all of that truffle. I feel like I'm walking through a field in Italy here. So tell us about this cheese.
So, yeah, Toma truffle, it's actually made on our original regular Toma, which is considered American original. And what that means is that it doesn't follow any known recipes from anywhere in the world. It uses some combinations of tricks and methods of making cheeses I would call it from the old world of Europe. So it is a combination of Gouda and Havarti, what makes this cheese a little bit more unique. We introduced Toma in 2010 to the market, and it has this nice, rich, buttery flavor with nice grassy tang finish at the end. And in 2019, right before pandemic, we were approached by the customer to make special cheese for them, and we started experimenting with flavors. We didn't want to do flavors in the past, but we were like, okay, we're gonna do this one-off. And the summer before 2019, the Giacomini family, they went to Italy for vacation, and they happened to go to Sabatino family who grows truffles, and they said to Sabatino family that if we ever make cheese with truffle, we're only gonna use your guys' truffles. So fast forward a year later, we were not gonna ever make flavored cheeses, but then we decided, okay, let's go for it. So we naturally had to try make truffle Toma. And the thing about truffle is that they're very oily. So it's hard to mix sometimes oil and oil, which is fats from milk and then from the truffle. So truffles can be tricky that way as well. But because of that, it altered a little bit of the original texture of Toma. Toma normally it's more elastic. It's not as creamy. Toma truffle is going to be the creamiest out of all 4 Tomas we have in our line, just because of the little bit of extra fat which comes from the truffles. And what the fat does is retain a little bit of moisture, so the texture is really creamy. It really will melt in your mouth. So it is a washed curd cheese, and what that means is that during the process of cheese making, we will remove portion of the whey and we'll wash it with hot water to remove available lactose for lactic acid bacteria to convert it into acid. So we are able to keep the pH or acidity of the cheese a little higher. And that would makes the cheese more elastic, more soft, and pliable. It actually has a pH range of pasta filata, which makes it for very good meltable cheese. So you can very easily, grate it on potatoes, or you can subsidize tomato truffle for mozzarella on a pizza, for instance.
Yeah, a couple of things about this cheese. What I love about it is that, and there are a lot of truffle cheeses I really don't like. The truffle is just overwhelming. I like this cheese because you can still taste the toma underneath it. You still get that butter, that warm butter flavor of plain toma under the truffles. The other thing which you touched on is that this is just a great cooking cheese. In fact, I probably cook with it more than I just eat it straight. It is wonderful on polenta. You've made your polenta and you put it out on your board and you just slice some toma truffle on top and it will melt. And it's like a really, inexpensive way to get your truffle hit. But I use it in grilled cheese sandwiches. Laura's the grilled cheese queen, but you probably use toma truffle and grilled cheese, Laura, I would bet.
Yes, definitely. And actually toasted cheese, because to me, this cheese tastes like when you have actual truffle shaved on a pasta that's made with butter. That's what this tastes like to me. Also, it makes a difference. I am shaving this cheese using this, and it melts on my tongue much better than if I'm cutting it into pieces. And it's also not, the truffle flavor comes through, but it's not overwhelming, which for me is a deal killer when it comes to cheeses. You alluded to that, Janet, that if it's too strong, it's too strong, if there's too much truffle. And this is really, like I say, this is kind of like butter and truffle. One thing that might be a little bit surprising to people is that when you look at this cheese, you don't really see the truffle. You see a couple of little flecks of truffle in it, but I can see some here, but generally, obviously a little bit must go a long way because it's infusing all of the cheese, but you don't actually see a lot of it. And that might be the oils you're referring to, Kuma.
Yeah. So Sabatino family actually makes for us a specific zest of truffle, which is combination. It's got a little bit of oil in it as well. So the pieces, like you mentioned, if you look at the paste of the cheese, you will see smaller speckles of truffles. We didn't want to have big chunks, and that was done on purpose because the bigger the chunk can also cause some defects in the paste of the cheese by having too much oils around and having a white blotchy spots. So we didn't want to have that neither. So they really we've worked together with Sabatino family to really get that zest dialed in to meet our requirements for cheese making. And you're right, our batches are 1,000 gallons. We do 1,000-gallon vats, which is about 1,000 pounds of cheese. And we put in a very small fraction of truffles. When I did research, when we started making flavors, we did experiments, and we, like Janet, you mentioned that we want to make sure that we didn't want to hide and overpower the toma. The whole goal was to make sure that the toma still is the queen of the show, and then the truffle is just enhances and brings the flavors, more robust flavors to the toma. So we want to still make sure that toma is a star.
Remy, what do you where did you go wine wise? Did you have a preference?
With what?
Well, I wondered whether Remy had a wine preference
between
sparkling wine and the Pinot.
Well, I really love the how the sparkling wine complements the creamy butteriness and like the light nutty notes of the toma as far as like the base cheese. And so I think if we were having the straight Toma, it would hands down that the sparkling would be the winner. But given the subtle truffle flavor, which is truffles and mushrooms and earth tone foods are often a really great pairing for Pinot Noir. So I think that you could really go either way. I'm curious to hear too from all the guests what their favorite is. I generally drink a lot of sparkling, so I'm slightly on that preference, but I think that given that little bit of that subtle truffle notes, that it really does highlight well with the Pinot Noir as well. What did you think?
I actually think that the sparkling wine enhances the flavors of truffle. It's like the effervescence of it brings the little bit more flavorful note of truffle to the upfront a little bit.
I actually, because the base cheese, as you said, Remy, the base Toma without the truffle would definitely be, I think, the one I would choose with the sparkling wine. I'm actually choosing it with the sparkling wine for the same reason now. It sort of cuts the richness, but the butteriness of the cheese somehow finds its way really nicely with the sparkling wine. I feel like with the Pinot, I lose a little bit of the fruit in the wine, but it also brings out an earthiness that I do like. So it's kind of, we're splitting hairs here. Both are great.
Well, let's move on to our next cheese, which is the newest one in Point Reyes' lineup. And Quinta is the name. It's the one with the bay leaf on top. And I know Kuba will give us some history of this cheese, so I won't bother, but I want to show you how to get into it. If you haven't already dug into your Quinta, this is an unusual style of cheese, and you don't just try to cut it into wedges like you might a Brie. For one thing, it's got this spruce bark on the outside. You're going to have a really tough time trying to cut it. So the traditional way to do it is to cut across the top and fold back the top. And let's see if I can do it. This is kind of an awkward angle, but I just got a little paring knife, and I'm going to go around the top, and I'm just going to go about halfway, and then I'm going to fold it back, and so you can get into it. You see, I think it's having a hard time with the focusing on the light, but I've just folded back a half of it, and now it's really soft and just supple underneath, and you can scoop it out with a spoon or a butter knife and spread it on a piece of bread or a cracker. If you don't eat the whole thing, then you can just fold back your half, put it in a Tupperware, and there you go. But that's the traditional way. If you know you're going to eat the whole thing, just go ahead and slice off that whole top and remove it, and let your guests just dig in. So
my guess is there are some people out there, Janet, saying, "You mean you don't eat the whole thing?"
Maybe not by myself, but Kuba, tell us about how this cheese came to. Tell us what the name means, because I know it does have some special meaning, and then tell us what are the challenges of making a cheese like this.
So I've had this. So I'll go back, ways back. It's just going back to like 2009, 2010. Giacomini family, Dean Giacomini, who was Bob Giacomini's wife, who's the president of the company. She always loved soft ripened cheeses, and we never really got to it. Unfortunately, she passed away before we were able to make this cheese, and she's it was something which we want to make it to add to our production line, as well as to fulfill Dean's dream. But we were so it took many years, obviously, before I got to that project, because we got busy with other cheeses, and 2020 was coming up, and we were having our 20th anniversary, which got shut down by COVID. But in the meantime, I was already working on developing the cheese. It was completely outside of my wheelhouse. It's totally different style than what I was used to. It's very tricky cheese to make, especially to make it right, where it's spoonable and it has a great flavors. It doesn't have too much ammonia, and and ripens properly, so it doesn't have many defects. So quinta in Portuguese means estate, but also, and that was more tribute to the girl's mom, Dean, who was from Portugal, you know, to give back to her heritage. And then also we have a lot of our employees are from Spain, from Mexico, so the Hispanic. And in quinta in Hispanic means fifth. So this is our fifth kind of a core line cheese we've made. We have original blue, we have a bay blue, we have a Gouda, Toma, and a quinta was the last one. It was the fifth. This cheese had a lot of challenges. It took me a good year and a half of figuring out how to make it, and I was when I figured out how to make it, I kind of sat down. I remember sitting down in my office. I was like, how come I did not think about this right away? It was so obvious, it was right in front of me, and I just couldn't see how to make this sooner. But it was very complex. We've also ran into some challenges during COVID. We started producing, we released it to distribution, and then we hit the supplies issues of the bark, and we could not get the bark for several months. I think we're out of the market for about 6 to 8 months, I believe, or maybe even a little longer, just because we couldn't get the bark, which was the important part of this cheese, because this cheese is so soft that it will, if you don't have it wrapped with the spruce bark, it will fall apart. And the bark we're purchasing from France. So not only COVID was delayed everything, but you know, the shipping channels and all the other aspects of this made it more difficult. So it was a little bit of a problematic child for a while, but now, you know, we moved on. Now we have a full product, and we're happy with it. It's we're making in 2 sizes. This is the ones we offer today was the 10 ounce. We also made a smaller version with just 5 ounce. They do age a little differently, but I'm gonna focus on 10 ouncer. The cheese is it's aged. The shelf life is about 100 days from the day we make it. We recommend consuming it from day 30 on. Between 30 and 50 days, this cheese is young. It's got a fresh, buttery, milky flavor. It can be a little lactic, but it still have a nice sweet notes of milk. And then from 50 on, it started becoming a little bit more savory. It gets some herbaceous notes of which comes from bark, which the bark also is infused with some of the bay leaves, which comes actually from our farm. And that's also why we put the bay leaf on top of the wheel, just to bring a little bit of our farm to that cheese and have our own terroir of this unique product. And to your point also, what you said earlier about that can you eat the whole thing? Yes, you can, except the bark. But you will get a lot of, you know, and I personally enjoy the rind when the cheese is under 50 days. It's a little bit softer. It's not quite as crusty yet. It will have a flavor of like a wild or like a white button mushroom, and it can be very lovely as well. As the cheese ages out, unfortunately penicillium is known to produce a little bit of ammonia, so you might start getting a little bit more defects. But when the rind is young, it's very pleasant to eat as well.
You know, and I want to point out, if you didn't notice, your wheel had a date stamp on it on the rind. It says when it's, I mean, yeah, on the outside it says when it's made and sort of enjoy by, kind of a you know, use by date. So you can judge how mature your cheese is by that day. Mine was made on November 5th, so almost a 60-day old piece of cheese. I know it could go another 30 days, and I would still love it. It's going to get more supple. It's going to get more almost kind of mustardy kind of flavor. I already get a little bit of that, but I love the way that spruce bark gives it a really woodsy, you know, just that woodsy note that makes me think of kind of leaf litter. And it's a really, to me, this is a fall cheese, kind of a holiday cold weather cheese. And now is the perfect time to enjoy it.
Yeah, so it certainly was made in style of the Vacherin Mondor, which is the French cheese, which is made in French and Swiss Alps during the winter months. So when the milk is rich and then full of fat. So yeah, so certainly was the style we were aiming for. However, I will say that our cheese is much milder than Vacherin Mondor. Vacherin Mondor is can be very pungent, has a little bit of bee linens. If anybody's familiar, it can have a little bit of a what I say? Laura, help me out with wordage.
Yeah, I was going to say bee linens. I think in the vernacular we call those stinky cheeses.
Yeah,
and it's yeah, they're bacteria, but they lend a little bit of orange color to it and a little bit of that aromatic quality that some people just go crazy for, and some people are like, no. But you know, the cheese, my Quinta, and you know, we all probably have cheese from similar batches, if not the same, but they are going to present differently to each of us for different reasons. And I am finding a lot of mustardy characteristics in mine. I very often feel this cheese is kind of a little bit like, because that woodiness, a little bit like a hot dog and mustard together. And you just need the bun. And so I'm getting a little bit of that today or tonight, which makes it sometimes a challenge for wine pairing. Although I have my favorite among these two. So Remy, enter in here. What do you think?
Well, I think similarly to the last one, it's dealer's choice. Both of the pairings are very lovely. This cheese is outstanding. And I think if it didn't have and similar to the truffle and the toma, if this cheese didn't have the bay laurel, that I would have been even more inclined to go for the sparkling wine, which I think pairs really well with it. Similar to what Kuba was saying in terms of the bubbles lifting the truffle flavor. I get that with the herbal notes of the Quinta and the bay leaf and bark, which I really like. And I think it highlights the zestiness of the sparkling wine. And then obviously the creaminess of the sparkling wine pairs really well with the creaminess of the cheese. I just love a cheese that oozes. Just needed to throw that in there. However, with the bay laurel, I think that brings out something really special in our Pinot Noir, which is the herbal and non-fruit notes of our Pinot Noir. And I think that's a hallmark of a serious Pinot Noir, especially in California, when Pinot Noir can tend to be very fruity, and that a lot of California Pinot Noirs, because of all of our beautiful sunshine here, the fruit characteristics tend to dominate. And while our Pinot Noir does have a lot of the classic berry and cherry notes that you want in a Pinot Noir, it also has a fair amount of non-fruited character like earth notes and spice notes. And I think that the Quinta plays really well with that in terms of how the bay laurel highlights the herbal notes in the Pinot Noir.
Yeah, the Pinot definitely gets my vote on this one.
Mine as well.
Yeah.
No, I have to say I did a little experiment, and I tasted a little bit closer as you were talking about those notes, herbaceous notes and earthy notes. I tried it closer to the bark, and I really enjoyed with Pinot. And that's where the flavors of woodiness are even a little stronger in that herbaceous flavors from the bay laurel. And I tried a little closer to the middle with the sparkling. I actually enjoy more because of that buttery flavor. So it can be, you can split your votes both ways and say that, both wines actually work well with the cheese. Just depends which part of cheese you're gonna try.
That's so cool. It's like two cheeses in one and two wines. So, which is why cheese and wine pairing is so darn hard, because somebody might get this bite and you say, oh my gosh, this cheese and the Pinot are so amazing. And they're like, okay, whatever you say. And then you get to that part of the cheese and you try it with the Pinot, and all of a sudden, oh yeah, I get it. So cheese and wine pairing is very subjective. And a lot of it has to do with where you are tasting the cheese, closer to the rind or not. And also the wines, the temperature. And also, Remy, I deliberately poured the sparkling wine into a white wine glass, not a champagne flute, because I wanted to release more of the aromas, and I just sort of prefer drinking it out of this. But I know it's it's a bit of, well, I don't know if it's controversial, but I know that some people think this is like not okay. And some people think that flutes are no longer okay. So how do you enter in on this?
Well, in general, at Domaine Carneros, we want people to just drink bubbles however they want to. So we don't want to overcomplicate things for people. But I do wholeheartedly support the white wine, kind of an all-purpose glass. I think that that's usually my go-to at home. I think that it does kind of elevate the aromatic experience. But flutes are fun as well and kind of festive, and they're a unique glass for bubbly. So I have nothing against the flute. At the winery, we often use the tulip glass, which is kind of the best of both worlds, where you've got a little bit of a wider middle and then narrows, and that kind of channels the aromatics into your palate when you're smelling the wine, and also gives a little bit of wider like a wider surface area to release the aromatics into the wine. So I really think it's up to you. Even a coupe is fun and festive, and so we're not judgmental here, and we want people to just drink bubbles and enjoy it.
Laura, you want to get us going on the next cheese? Would you like to introduce our next cheese?
That I can do. And what I was going to say about it is that, first of all, it's absolutely, well, how can I say it's one of my favorites from Point Reyes, since I kind of am, that's not a limited list, but it really is. And I think it's a cheese that probably wouldn't have been part of the selection of cheeses made at Point Reyes were it not for you, Kuba. And I don't know if you had a background in making this cheese, or you just loved it, or you just thought, oh, this would be a good cheese for us to make. I'm not sure the origins of this Gouda, but all I know is that I'm really glad you did it.
So yeah, Gouda was a little bit of a, I wouldn't say not a mistake, but it was one of those cheeses which so the full story is, let me back up.
We only have a little while now, just so you know.
I came in 2009 to Point Reyes, and there's only original blue. The girls, three sisters, four sisters actually at the time, wanted to introduce new cheeses, and the previous cheesemaker really was focusing on blue cheese. That's all he wanted to do. So when I came on board, the girls were like, well, can we make something else? So I started experimenting with the cheeses, and that's how Toma was created. And during that same time, I was experimenting with the Alpine style cheeses, some farmhouse style. And one of them was traditional Dutch Gouda. And that was kind of more going a little bit to what I was taught through Fawn Smith, who I mentioned earlier. He's a Dutch cheesemaker. So I decided I'm going to try it. And so we made some first batches in 2010, along with other products. And believe it or not, the wheels got a little bit mixed up, and we lost them for about 1.5 to 2 years.
Wow.
And one day we're doing upgrading our brining room / aging room at the time. And we found some extra wheels, so we started tasting them, and we were like, oh my God, this is really good. It has those nice crystal notes, it had, the color was like butterscotch. It has a sweetness, caramely sweet flavors with some nuts and hazelnuts. So we just decided, oh my God, we got to start making this. So to this day, we make this product in a very small volume. We only produce about 200 wheels a month. And to give you a contrast, we produce about 6,000 wheels of Toma every month. So it's a very small production. We make them in the 20-pound wheels because the Goudas do age best in about 20-pound wheel. It's a perfect ratio of losing moisture throughout the aging process, and we do age it for about 12 to 14 months right now. As you see the cheese, it will have some white speckle. Those are tyrosine crystals. Usually happens in a further after about 9 months of aging, as the cheese is losing moisture. However, what's unique about our Gouda is that it still retains the creamy flavors and the creamy texture. It's not that dry, brittle, old Amsterdamer, you get in the store, which is all crackly and has overly crystallized. It's really well balanced. So, and I think that's what makes this cheese very unique to really eat almost on its own. Like I personally don't like to pair it with anything like food wise. Like I like to have it on its own with a glass of wine because of that sweetness it has. It's very rich.
Yeah,
It is
but you know
rich.
what I like about it compared to, you know, some of these Dutch Goudas that we get that are so old. They are so, you have one bite of those and it's that first bite's very pleasing. They're like butterscotch candy, but that's all you want. You can't eat any more of them. They're so
Yeah.
dense and concentrated and super sweet. Your cheese, you can just keep eating and eating and eating. It's got that gorgeous creaminess, and I always get kind of a pineapple note out of it, or sort of a roasted pineapple note on top of that caramel note.
Yeah.
It's just the texture is fabulous, the aroma is so compelling, and it's just I can't stop eating it kind of cheese.
And even though you said that you like it just on its own, Kuba, what I like about it also is the texture, because it will melt. And unlike a lot of the Goudas that you're referring to that are more aged and just harder cheeses, it will melt. And I have not a problem with that. And again, you know, in its melted form, but simply, you know, I feel like it can be overwhelmed easily too, once it's melted, but I think it's great melted, but it's great like this as well. It's perfect on a cheese board because it really holds its own. And as Janet said, it's something you can just keep eating, and which is good news, bad news. So how about with the wines?
Well, you can probably tell I'm not going to pick my favorite child in this conversation tonight, but instead choose to highlight what I think is the best of each pairing. So I feel like with the sparkling wine, it's a really fun textural experience. Not only do you have the interplay of the crystals, but you have that with the mousse or the bubbles of the sparkling wine, and that is, you know, just really fun and lovely. But I do also think the Pinot Noir is a great pairing, and it seems like others on the chat are agreeing in the sense that the aged Gouda has a little bit more robustness than some of the other cheeses that we've had, and so having the tannin and the structure in the Pinot Noir is a nice interplay with the aged Gouda. And also I feel like Kuba touched a little bit on the sweetness of the Gouda, and for me that's really highlighting some of the wild berry and like wild strawberry notes in the Pinot Noir, and I really love that.
I totally agree with everything you just said, and not just because you're you. I totally agree. The one thing I wanted to point out is that as both wines, but the sparkling wine, as it gets a little bit warmer, that toasty quality really comes to the fore, which I really like. And I don't know if everybody does, but I do. But still, the wine is retaining its acidity and all of its other components. But I just noticed that a little bit more, and so I feel like I'm having cheese and bread, and it's wonderful.
You know, I know what I couldn't help thinking about as I tasted it with these two wines is that I know, Remy, you also make a wine that has more residual sugar, a sparkling wine. I'm forgetting the name of it, but I think that's where I would go. I want a little more sweetness in the sparkling wine. So I want something that's not quite so austere with this Gouda. What is the sparkling wine you make that's got some more residual sugar?
It's interesting. It's called Vermeil, and it's our brut base with a touch more sugar from the dosage. And we also use Le Rêve, which is our tête de cuvée, 100% Blanc de Blanc from our favorite vineyard, as the base for the dosage liqueur. Vermeil is a technique that means gold on silver, and so that's the idea of putting the gold of the Le Rêve on the brut as a little special touch for the sweetness. And it's interesting that you mentioned that, because I was going to actually mention it with the next cheese to fast forward. And I think, but to your point, the more robust the cheese, if you're going with a sparkling wine, it can handle a little bit more sweetness, which is why a lot of people think sparkling wine, especially those that have a little bit more residual sugar, pairs really well with robust foods and spicy foods. And I think similarly with the cheeses, it pairs well with more robust cheese. And I had a major epiphany with blue cheese, and this blue cheese in particular with our sparkling wine. So stay tuned.
Well, thank you for that segue.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was just going to say, Kuba, there is a question. People would like to know what is on the outside of the Gouda.
So the Gouda is covered with cheese coating. It's a special coating, which is it's a clear coating, which allows us to preserve the rind as well as control the oxygen exchange and moisture loss from the cheese. The one other thing I would mention, going back to like sometimes those old Dutch Goudas, which are aged for over 2 years and they're very dry. If you look at the bottom of the rind, you will often see like a darker, almost like a grayish looking discoloration. This is because it's oxidation, and it will have very unpleasant flavor. It will absolutely destroy the experience of that nice sweet flavors. It will be kind of musty. So the cheese coating prevents from this to happen. So if you maintaining that rind by putting the cheese coating on a regular basis allows us to keep the entire paste fully intact. It is a plastic polymer. It's a food grade. If you eat it, you'll be fine. But it is you can if you peel it, you can when it warms up especially, you can peel it off, and it's just a little bit of it's just called cheese coating.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay.
So, well, let's move on to our final cheese, which Remy alluded to. It's one of the 2 blue cheeses that they make at Point Reyes, and the second one that they created. And it's always been just a favorite of mine. It's kind of, if you're familiar with Stilton, it may remind you of Stilton. It's more buttery, more nutty, more mellow than their original blue. And it's got a rind on it, a little bit of a rind. And I just think it's a fabulous place to end. So Kuba, would you tell us a little bit about Bay Blue, how you make it and how we should think about it when we're tasting it?
Yeah, so Bay Blue, it's a cheese which I actually didn't want to make, and I made it against my own will. Nobody forced me to do it. Just because when I started working for Point Reyes, I really had no experience with blue cheeses, and I never realized I didn't realize up until first few days of working here how difficult blue cheeses can be and how tricky they are. And so it took me about 8 months to kind of refine the original blue recipe. And after that, I told myself it was a very stressful first 8 months of my employment here. I was like, you know what? I'm never making another blue cheese ever again because it's just not worth it. There's a reason why I don't have hair anymore. I lost it because of the blue cheese. But jokes aside, one day I decided that the original blue is made in such a complex way that I was thinking about it. It was like, you know what? There's a much simpler way of making blue cheese. It doesn't have to be so complicated. And so that's how the Bay Blue started. And the idea behind the Bay Blue was to make it not being this classic blue cheese, just like original blue is. Original blue is very classic, pungent, sweet, milky notes up front, very buttery texture, almost spoonable, and a pungent kind of a finish. Where Bay Blue, it's more like a little bit of a chameleon. It depends where you try it. It can taste differently. And the unique thing about the blue cheeses is that they are aging from inside to the outside, as opposed to bloomy rind cheeses, which age from outside to the inside. So if you look at the wedge of cheese and you taste the tip of the cheese, which is the middle of it, you will have more sweet notes. It will have a little bit more blue cheese characteristics. If you move closer to the rind, you will start getting a little more savory umami flavors with a little bit slight higher hints of salt. And the reason the salt is a little bit more pronounced towards the rind is because we hand salt every wheel instead of a brining. So salt absorption is a little bit less controllable for us. But I would say the age difference between the middle of the cheese and the rind is about 2 weeks in flavor. So I personally really enjoy Bay Blue when it's at about 45 days in the middle of the cheese. So if I know I'm eating 60-day-old cheese, I'm eating closer to the rind.
Interesting. It's
So-
I was going to point out that they really do, just like the Quinta, really do taste like two different cheeses, much more savory toward the rind, and as you said, sweeter toward the center. And texturally, they're very different too. You know,
Mhm.
you've got the creamier, and then you've got the a little bit more firm toward
Yeah.
the rind, which all makes sense. But it really is interesting in terms of not only the flavor and the textural sensations, but also when it comes to pairing. So Remy, what do you think, since you love this cheese?
I do love this cheese. It's just incredible. So much balance and subtlety with complexity at the same time. And well, the good news, you queued it up for me. Both the wines are great with this cheese. And maybe a little bit more if you have the center with the sparkling wine, which enhances the creaminess. And a little bit of the sweetness. And I think what we were starting to talk about with Janet was the level of dosage or the level of sweetness in the wines. And we make our brut with a range of sweetness. So we make a wine called the Ultra Brut, which would pair well with kind of less aged cheeses like and also like softer, like whiter cheeses. I don't know all the technical terms like you guys do, but like a goat cheese or like a younger triple cream cheese. And then we've got our estate brut, which is what we're having, and it's sort of the Goldilocks. And I think it's done really good job, like going the distance in this tasting. It pairs well with all of these wines, with all of these cheeses. That the Vermeil, which is the wine with a little bit of extra sweetness, is just an incredible wine with this Bay Blue. And I had an epiphany with that when I first started working here. I tended to not be that interested in demi-secs or sweeter sparkling wines. And when I had our Vermeil with this Bay Blue, was a complete game changer for me. I love that pairing so much. And it really opened my mind to the purpose of the higher dosage levels and how well it pairs with Indian food or Thai food or spicy foods, but also with more pungent foods as well as like this blue cheese. So really incredible. I think probably more classically though, the earthiness of the blue cheese pairs really well with the Pinot Noir in a more classic pairing.
Yeah, I typically am not a fan of blue cheese with dry red wine, but this one works. I'm not sure why, except that the blue is pretty mellow and that Pinot has just a lot of depth to it. So that's working for me. That would be my choice between the two.
I think that what you just said, Janet, I think underscores why Pinot is such a cheese-friendly wine, not just blue cheese or anything else, because there's less to compete with. Cheese is a very complex, if it's good, it's a very complex thing. And if you're trying to, I think what you said is, and I feel the same way, if we were trying to pair a big Cabernet or something with this Bay Blue, I think it would be a disaster, because that would just be two things really competing against each other and bringing out bitterness and all of these things. But this Pinot is just so balanced itself, and the tannins are soft. So you're not competing against those tannins in particular, the tannins being the drying and sometimes even bitter sensation that one gets. So I think that that's why, for me anyway, that's what I'm telling myself, that's why this Pinot goes with this Bay Blue, and also the savoriness of this blue, relatively speaking. Other blues, including your original blue, Kuba, has kind of a tanginess to it, a buttermilk characteristic to it. And although I have successfully paired original blue with bigger red wines, I think in the case of this more earthy style blue cheese, a Pinot stands a chance. and more than.
We wind up our hour. I don't know if there are questions, because on my Zoom screen, I can't see if there are any questions.
Well, so Remy, someone has a question for you, wondering about your Pinot. How is it more balanced than other California Pinots? Of course, that's an obviously biased question on the part of this person, but it's a good one.
Well, I like their bias.
Yes, exactly.
But I think just in general, what we kind of touched on it a little bit earlier, the hallmarks of a good quality Pinot Noir is one that has good acidity and also some non-fruit character. So those earth and spice tones. And I think this wine does a really great job of that. So I think it's, you know, a little bit earlier harvest so that you capture some of the herbal notes and the spice notes. It's interplaying with the right amount of barrels in your barrel program, not too much new oak to overwhelm it, but just enough to highlight those earthy and spicy flavors.
Okay. And this same person would like to know the best way to store leftover cheese from this tasting. What do you mean leftover? Okay,
Yeah,
just
exactly.
kidding. So Kuba, would you like to answer that?
Yeah, so cheese was let's take blue cheese first. It's kind of like with wine. Oxygen is your friend and your enemy. So when you want to store the cheese, especially blues, you wanna minimize the amount of oxygen. The oxygen will continue to make the mold bloom, therefore the shelf life will be shorter. So ideally, aluminum foil, wrap it really tightly. You'll be very successful with storing cheese for several weeks. Don't be alarmed if you have a little bit of a surface mold growth on it. It's just simply scrape it off and enjoy the rest of the cheese. After all, it is a blue cheese. And
What are you putting it in that case then? How are you
I'm
wrapping?
sorry?
How are you wrapping it in to
Like
do that?
I would do aluminum foil. You can do saran wrap too. The tighter. I know. If you don't have a really proper cheese paper, we use aluminum with plastic layers, which is a special plastic which allows us to control really not infusing any flavors. It's all about controlling the oxygen going into that product. So I didn't say surround, I'm gonna say aluminum foil tightly, and then maybe put in the Ziploc bag too over it. So then eliminates more oxygen.
So I sometimes will put a cheese like this just on its own, but in a Tupperware type container. I haven't wrapped it. Am I doing it wrong?
No, I mean you don't want to dry it. So as long as you have a small container which doesn't have too much oxygen and it doesn't dries the cheese out, then that's probably fine. But it's all about, again, like the amount of oxygen present, because not only will encourage the mold to bloom and cover the cheese with mold, but also you're gonna have some drying problems. So that's why wrapping it is actually if you wrap it and put it in Tupperware, probably that's gonna be the best bet in my opinion.
But keep that blue cheese separate from your other cheeses, in my experience, because that blue mold will travel.
Yeah, it will travel quickly. Yes, and and the quinta, it's I personally try not to leave quinta for another sitting. I feel like the quinta is very sensitive to any dryness and any oxygen exposure. It will dry out, creating a little bit of a crust, which is nothing wrong with it. It just loses some of the creaminess. But if you do need to store it, then like Janet recommended, putting the lid back on, putting in a smaller Tupperware container, keeping it humid, it's the key.
Well,
Is it
need
okay to
wrap up.
I'm sorry.
I think we need to wrap up, but we would be happy to answer any questions that were on the question list or in the chat that didn't get answered. Laura and I will personally answer them via email. And we just want to thank all of you for joining us, and especially thank our guests, Remy Cohen from Domaine Carneros and Kuba Hemmerling from Point Reyes Farmstead Cheese. It's been such a pleasure to taste your products and taste them together. And we're so grateful for you two and for all of you who joined us on Cheese O'Clock tonight. Laura, I'm sure you have a final word.
Some parting words. Well, yes, no, thank you for spending this time with us on Cheese O'Clock. And it's really fun, I think, for Janet and me to come back with you and And yeah, you can find, once again, you can find the recordings soon on both Janet's and my website so that you can repeat this fabulous experience. And I'm sure that Janet and Kuba and all the folks at Point Reyes Cheese and at Domaine Carneros would be happy to hear from you in any way. And of course, Domaine Carneros, if you're in the Napa Valley, please go visit because it's absolutely gorgeous. Never mind the great wines that they make there. And likewise, you can make appointments at the Fork, which is the culinary arm of Point Reyes Cheese, and go visit there. And otherwise, you can find the cheeses and wines probably wherever you buy cheese and wine.
Thank you all. Have a good evening.
Well,
Thank you.